Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the committee members for listening to me. I'll try to be brief because I know there's a lot of people here to speak. I'm speaking against this bill. I think it should be called, and I'm going to try to speak to a fairly narrow focus, this should be called the Anti-Gun Safety Bill, because this gun would ensure that no one gets properly trained in the use of firearms in the state of New Hampshire. I'm an NRA certified instructor, but I will no longer be able to teach classes if this bill passes. It's really simple. If this bill passes, I could not teach a class and comply with the law. The law says that, in short, if when you're transferring a gun in a non-commercial private sale or transfer, if the status of either party's eligibility to own or possess a gun cannot be ascertained, the transaction shall be completed through a licensed firearm dealer. Now, if I have a firearms class, maybe 10 students show up, we might have 5 instructors. We usually try to make the ratio about 2 to 1. There's no way I can tell whether those people that sign up for the class are eligible to own or possess a firearm. Right now, there's no requirement for me to check that. There's never been a problem with it, but under this law, I couldn't do that. The only way I could do that is to go and take all 15 of the people associated with the class, instructors and students alike, go down to a licensed firearm dealer and say, okay, the morning of the class, everyone's got to have a background check. That takes about 20 minutes a person to get one of these background checks. I've had many of them done. That's about 5 hours, and it costs about $300. Now, that's provided you can get someone to do this. Remember, the firearms dealer is in the business of selling guns. They're not in the business of doing background checks. You come in and you say you're going to tie up his store for 5 hours on a Saturday morning, for example. He's going to say, go away, I'm here to sell guns. If you're not going to buy any, we're not going to do this service. So you probably couldn't get it done if you wanted to. So what this tells you is there won't be any safety classes because you won't be able to do it. It's part of a thing in a class, for example, using people that aren't familiar with it. It usually starts out with a classroom session where you demonstrate to the students the safe handling of guns. You may take a revolver and you load it with blanks, and then you have individual students come up and do the same thing. That involves me transferring the gun to the student, and then the student transferring the gun back to me, both of which would require a background check unless we can ascertain that we legally can hold a gun, which there's no way of either me or the student knowing that. By virtue of my certification as a firearms instructor, it doesn't do anything about a background check one way or the other. So all of these classes would have to be canceled. And if it was a multi-day class, of course, you'd have to do that both days of the class, because someone goes home Saturday night and has a few beers and gets in a fight with his spouse, the next thing you know, he's been charged with domestic abuse, and the next day he would not be eligible for transfer of that gun. So it's going to be an anti-safety gun. What you're saying, if you pass this bill, is that we don't want people trained in the safe use of firearms. We want them to buy a gun, take it home, and practice on their own, and maybe learn the hard way what firearm safety really is. But it won't just impact gun safety classes. I'm also a range safety officer. And one of the things that does is you make sure that everyone's playing by the correct safety rules at a particular range. Oftentimes people come there with not that much experience with guns, and one of the more common occurrences is a jam, especially in a semi-automatic pistol. It's happened many times. Someone gets it, the pistol jams, I go over and he says, I can't get it unjammed. Okay, let me have the gun, I'll put it in a safe direction, I'll get the jam undone, hand the gun back to him. That would not be allowed under this law, because even if he handed me the gun and he was ignorant of the law, I certainly, knowing of the law, would not be able to give it back to him. I'd have to say, I have to hold on to this until you get a background check. So that's another situation where you're going to allow someone with less knowledge trying to resolve a jam in a gun, which is another safety issue. So I just think you really have to look at this hard to see what you're doing. Under this bill, any transfer of a firearm that was not done immediately after the performance of a background check by a licensed dealer would be illegal. So if you were if you bought a new gun and you had a friend over, and as far as you were aware, he doesn't have a criminal record, but you've only known him for 3 or 4 years. Who knows what record he had 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And he says, oh, can I see that gun? Well, and you make sure it's unloaded, you hand him the gun, he looks at it, he hands it back, boom, we both just broke the law. So I think you really have to look at the ramifications of this, and also consider what crimes has it actually been committed doing this. We've heard from the previous speaker about a lot of, well, maybe this and some statistics, but let's deal with New Hampshire. Have there actually been cases where somebody bought a gun from a private party and then they went out and used that gun to commit a crime? Someone that bought the gun who wouldn't otherwise have passed a background check. I haven't heard of any of those. If there is some, they should bring it up. But my main point is, This is an anti-safety bill. If it passes, you will not have any gun safety classes in the state of New Hampshire. And I'm glad to take any questions.
Any questions? Representative Welch and Representative Ockett.
Are you familiar with the 159:12 sales of minors?
I'm not, I don't have it memorized, Representative Welch, no, but
Yeah? First of all, it says any person who shall sell, battle, hire, and so forth, give any pistol to a minor is guilty of a misdemeanor. But Section 2 of that, it says the section shall not apply to fathers, mothers, grandparents, guardians, administrators, or executives who give a pistol or revolver to their children or wards or to heirs to an estate. That's the current law. That would not work.
it would not work if this law was passed. You couldn't hand a gun unless you could absolutely be sure that the person you gave it to was eligible. And maybe if it was an 8-year-old child or something, you might be able to say, I know my child's never been arrested. But if it was your 22-year-old or 20-year-old son that came back from college, and you don't know what happened when he was in college, and you wanted to show him your new rifle, you couldn't hand it to him under this law.
Follow. Who would do the background check?
You have to go to a licensed firearm dealer to do it, and then he'd have to do it on you as well. So before you could transfer the gun, I guess, I don't know how, I guess the person who owned the gun would take it down to the store, they'd do a background check on the person they're going to give it to, the person who got it would have to have a background check done on the other person, and then they could exchange the gun very quickly, I guess.
Right.
And then Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for taking my question. Would it be helpful to define the word transfer more accurately?
Well, I think transfer is, to me, it's pretty straightforward. Transfer is when one person gives a gun to somebody else. That's transferring the gun. And you know, if you're transferring it for a couple of minutes in a gun safety class, or you're transferring it to a friend who's going to take it hunting for 2 weeks, it's a transfer.
Yeah, thank you for taking my questions. Along the same line, so if the bill said transfer of ownership, would you then feel free to continue with your safety?
You'd have to be really careful on how it was done, because I don't know, what exactly does ownership mean? That you're starting to get into a gray area where you still could have concerns. That, you know, I don't know, ownership could mean whoever possesses the gun. No, it's just not clear. And sometimes, many times in a class, the ownership of the gun is not by either of the people. It may be something, the gun may be owned by the club where the class is held. So no one's owning it, but the gun is being transferred from one person to the other. You could transfer, like I said, a gun to somebody who now then takes it because they're gonna go on a, you know, I mean, I know a friend of mine who transferred a gun to somebody who took it to Africa because he didn't have a gun of sufficient caliber to shoot whatever he was shooting in Africa. So it's really kind of tricky when you get into that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question, Representative. Would this bill also cause a havoc as far as the ATF goes and the state police as far as doing background checks?
Well, I would think you could certainly have an awful lot of them. The concept of people going in for classes, taking them would be, you know, all of a sudden you'd have 15 or 20 people showing up that weren't buying guns, trying to get background checks. So yeah, it would tend to overload the system. You'd obviously, if it was even to be done, I think the option would be you just wouldn't have any classes.
And you?
So it seems like what you're saying is someone can walk into a store, they can sign up for training. That person may or may not be known to you, but that person will be handed a firearm, and that person then has use of that firearm during the training session. That's what's happening.
Well, first of all, it's not walking into a store. They walk into they sign up at the either the NRA website, or they can sign up through a club. And in the process of doing that, they say that they can legally handle it, they're legally allowed to handle a gun. But we don't do a background check on that. Nobody does a background check on that. That's up to them. That's onus is on them. And when they come into the club or the range for the safety, We're not giving them a bag of bullets and a gun saying, go have fun. That's the whole point of having the class. It's direct supervision. Normally, there is no more than 2 students to 1 instructor. And they're given things like, okay, here's 2 bullets. Put them in the gun, shoot them. Here's 2 more bullets. This isn't, here's a bag of bullets, here's 10 magazines, go have fun whatsoever. So it's very structured and very regimented as to how many they can shoot, what happens with the guns. The instructor's right there. If there's a safety issue, the first thing you do is remove the gun from the student.
Representative Gordon,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming to testify. So, if I understand how you're reading this bill, if someone goes into a gun store and they ask the dealer to hand them a gun to look at, that would be a violation of the rule without doing a background check. Is that not what you were saying?
It certainly sounds like that to me. It talks about a commercial sale means a sale, transfer, or exchange of a firearm that takes place at or in the curtilage of a firearm or gun show or pursuant to an offer to sell, buy, transfer, or exchange a firearm that took place at the gun show or pursuant to an advertisement, posting, listing, or display. So the gun is in a display case. You come in, I'm the owner of the store. You say, could I hold the gun? I say, no, you can't. You can look at it, but I cannot transfer the gun to you under this law.
follow up.
But I think that you're misinterpreting the
Excuse me.
bill.
Excuse me.
But someone's got a radio or something.
There's, please silence radios, cell phones. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
The title of 153E:2 is firearm sale. So all this is relevant to sales, not of handling of a firearm at a store or in a gun show. This is about transferring ownership.
It
Does that
says,
change your opinion?
it says sale, transfer, or exchange, which to me means it doesn't have to be a sale. It could be just a transfer or an exchange, I guess, is I give you my gun, you give me yours. But certainly a transfer means someone just hands the gun to somebody else.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I was just,
Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
I just,
Croc TV.